They said it was incredible. The last person to text the prime minister would get the decision. So yeah, if you have somebody who's quite undisciplined at the heart of it, any technology can cause mayhem. And it must have been really difficult for Valance and Whitty. They must have wished that the internet hadn't been invented at that point.
So it's day 2 of the Hancock WhatsApp revelations. Like all earthquakes, the aftershocks aren't as powerful as the main tremor. Today we learned that Hancock rowed with Williamson about when to close schools during the pandemic. Well, we sat in these seats at the time, and that isn't much of a surprise. We'll talk to the journalist who revealed the content of those messages, Isabel Oakeshott, after 9. But the question we want to ask this morning is whether WhatsApp is a good way to run a government. Giles Wilkes is a former advisor to Theresa May when she was PM and senior fellow at the Institute for Government. Morning to you, Giles.
Good morning.
Now, before we just get onto the WhatsApp question, Matt Hancock is sad and disappointed by the betrayal of trust by Isabel Oakeshott. If you'd have been advising him, would you have suggested that maybe giving 100,000 WhatsApp messages to someone who disagreed with you fundamentally and philosophically about lockdown might have turned out like this?
I mean, I can see why he's sad. Disappointed. I mean, how could he be disappointed or surprised by what happened? I mean, I believe Isabel Oakeshott might have shared confidences similarly with someone else 10 years before who ended up in jail as a result. He ought to have known that this might have happened. So people are arguing about this all over the place. And one thing nobody can disagree about is how incredibly naive he was to have just put himself in this position. So yeah, I can understand he's sad, but my God, it was a bad idea.
This WhatsApp government, I don't know when you were, it was probably around when you were with Theresa May, Giles. I mean, It feels like WhatsApp is sort of this creeping, pernicious influence in all our lives. Is this an example of technology being good because ultimately we are seeing people constantly in contact in real time? Or is it bad because it strikes me that presumably Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty had better things to do than correct the maths of Boris Johnson?
Look, I think it's just another way of people communicating with each other. Before WhatsApp, there would have been like quick, hurried phone calls or dashing into the corridors to have a chat or text messages. I don't think it's about the technology particularly. And I also don't think it really shows you how the decisions were made. It's incredibly partial. There were meetings and documents. There's a whole pyramid of evidence that goes in before they make big decisions. Then at the end, they're having lots of WhatsApps because it's the most convenient thing around. So I don't think it really is WhatsApp government. I mean, it must have made it unrelenting because your WhatsApp never turns off. It's constantly pinging. So I've got real sympathy for the people like Vallance and Whitty trying to make really difficult decisions and it pinging all the way with Boris Johnson trying to ask what a percentage is and things like that. But I don't think it really shows how serious decisions are made.
But does it show that they're distracted? Because he wouldn't have called Chris Whitty to ask him about how a percentage works, but he can WhatsApp him. So it does change the burden that is placed on people. And that must have some sort of opportunity cost.
I mean, it must have. I want to. This won't surprise you. I don't think it was the way Theresa May operated.
How many WhatsApps did you get from Theresa May?
I mean, she sent me so few cat gifts; it became quite depressing after a while. I know that sometimes people would send a very serious email about the yield on the gilt or something. But so it's very much a personal style thing. When my friends who took over, who were in Downing Street through the transition after I sort of legged it after Theresa May left, they said it was incredible. The last person to text the prime minister would get the decision. So yeah, if you have somebody who's quite undisciplined at the heart of it, any technology can cause mayhem. And it must have been really difficult for Vallance and Whitty. They must have wished that the internet hadn't been invented at that point. But it is up to the politicians how they use these things. They didn't have to be plaguing people with silly questions all the time.
Do you think it's fair to people when this comes out? Because this was going to come out in an inquiry. I mean, I wonder how careful people were, because we've all been saying, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, Giles, that if all our WhatsApp messages were displayed for the world to see, we'd all have to leave the country.
Yeah, you have to write, particularly when you write emails, you have to write as if somebody's going to read it. I say this as somebody who had emails to and fro lobbyists read out to the Leveson inquiry about 10 years ago. So it is absolutely nerve-wracking. You feel like a bullet just missed your head. It wasn't the really, really stupid one that they decided to go for. So I think it probably does prevent fully frank conversations if you think that the guy you're talking to is going to leak the whole lot, of course. And that will have hurt decision making. But I don't think it's how the decisions were actually made.
I think that's a really critical point. Well made there, Giles. Giles Wilkes, their former advisor to Theresa May, from a rather different style of government, it must be said.
And if you like that,
you can listen to us.
We're Stig and Asthma. Have you forgotten?
Well done. Every Monday to Thursday on Times Radio Breakfast.